Today, we're joined by prop tech entrepreneur Austin Allison. From buying his first home at 17 to founding Dotloop, selling it to Zillow, and later launching Pacaso, Austin's journey is a masterclass in resilience and passion-driven problem solving. In this episode of Own It, we'll dive into how he's making vacation home ownership more accessible and the lessons he's learned along the way. Welcome to Own It. I'm Hillary Saunders, joined today by my special guest, Austin Allison, who is the CEO and founder of Pacaso. Welcome to Own It, Austin.
Thank you, Hillary. It's really a pleasure to be here. I've been a big fan of the work you all are doing inside for quite some time. So it's fun to share the mic here for a little bit.
That is very kind of you to say. I am a fangirl of yours because of your backstory and the gumption that you had very early on with creating your first company. So I'd love to start this conversation with, first of all, how did you get to buy a house when you were 17? And then what was that spark that pushed you into creating Dotloop?
Yeah, so it really all started for me as a young child, probably when I was 3 years old or so, because my dad was a carpenter and he always took me to the job sites, which means I was always around real estate. And when I was 17 years old, I had saved up about $4,000 through various odds and end jobs like landscaping and carpentry, and $4,000 was enough to put down on a home purchase in Cincinnati, Ohio, where I'm from. I bought a $40,000 property with a 90% loan. I put $4,000 down, had to buy it in my parents' name at the time because I wasn't of age to buy the property. But it was my house and I ended up renovating it with my dad. And it was sort of my first real estate project. And through that transaction, I learned about real estate agents. The real estate agent of this transaction made a couple $1,000s on the transaction, and that was more money than I had seen someone make in a single transaction in my entire life. And we grew up living paycheck to paycheck, so I didn't have a lot of extra money, and I needed a way to pay for college. So that's what led to selling real estate. Got my license when I was 18, sold all through undergrad, and then after undergrad went to law school. And in my first year of law school, I created Dotloop as a solution to a problem that I was experiencing as a real estate agent. I was in school, working multiple jobs, selling real estate, chasing buyers and sellers around to get documents signed in the hood of my car. And I thought to myself, there has to be a better way. Why can't people buy and sell homes through the internet? And I didn't have any tech background, but sort of kind of crafted up this vision for what Dotloop could become. Recruited a technical co-founder, and we were off to the races. That's how Dotloop was born.
You make my law school story sound sad because I did not create a company in the middle of law school. I barely got through it.
You were probably a better law school student than me, though. So you've got that on me.
Oh man. So tell me about the story of Dotloop, because I know the exit was splashy news, selling to Zillow, but creating a company and then, trajectory to that sell-off, was that your initial goal, or did that kind of transpire through the years of building it?
It definitely transpired through the years of building it. My goal was always to build a business that we would take public, that would live on and into perpetuity as its own standalone company. So I always viewed selling a company as a failure, which may sound a little bit, counterintuitive, but that's just sort of how I was programmed to think. I had such a clear vision for what Dotloop could become on its own that anything short of that I thought about as a failure. But more than anything else, in the way that I think about company building, the most important thing of all, in my opinion, is about the mission. It's about pursuing the mission and doing whatever is necessary to fulfill the mission to the greatest extent. And the reason why the Zillow sale made sense 6 or 7 years in is because I reached a moment in time where I believed that being part of Zillow would enable us to fulfill on the Dotloop mission in a bigger and better way than we would be able to accomplish on our own. And it just happened organically. We didn't run a process. I mean, we were basically talking to various partners about kind of commercial partnerships. And Zillow was one of those partners that we were in discussions with. And you get to know a company, they get to know you, and eventually you start to see synergies emerge where 1 + 1 equals 3 or more, and that's what happened. And it really ended up being a great move for Dotloop, I think for Zillow, and certainly for all of our employees and customers. And I learned a ton from that experience. I mean, I actually stayed on at Zillow for about 4 years, and there's such an incredible team of people there. The people who created and run that company are very, very smart, and I learned a lot from them. And I think as I reflect back on my professional career, that 4-year period I spent at Zillow was a pretty foundational part of how I developed to the point that I'm at today.
How, how what are some lessons that you learned that we can translate to other business owners through the contracting markets, right? Like this last year has been a bit of an interesting one, to say the least. And interesting is an operative word. Other people could fill in the blanks and use other 4-letter words, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But it's how do you, or what in your experience can you translate to give somebody a takeaway to say, this is what you should be focusing on in a year that maybe isn't hitting the numbers that you want to hit, or you're facing, difficulties?
There's a few things that come to mind. First and foremost is follow your passion. I'm a huge believer that someone should not, sometimes I meet new entrepreneurs and they just want to start a company because they want to be an entrepreneur or they want to get rich or, whatever the superficial reason is. And I think the only real reason why somebody should start a business is because there's a problem that needs to be solved or an opportunity that needs to be fulfilled that founder is very passionate about. So in my case, I was really passionate about efficiency. I've always been passionate about efficiency. And I was experiencing this problem firsthand as a real estate professional that I wanted to solve. So I sort of created the business not knowing anything about business creation or anything about fundraising. I was just maniacally focused on this problem that I was really passionate about solving. And I think that's important. Following your passion is important for a bunch of reasons. Probably the biggest reason is that life is short, so you might as well spend it on stuff that you enjoy and stuff that you love, right? Another reason is you end up doing a lot better work when you're working on something that you're passionate about. The third reason would be that when times are tough, sometimes that's like the thing that keeps you going. When you're just getting crushed day in and day out, struggling to hit your numbers, whatever the case might be, the passion, the thing that's like deep down inside of your heart that caused you to start this thing in the first place is like the guiding light and the source of energy and inspiration. So that is number one. Number two, or call it 1A, number 1 and 2, I think are tied for importance, is surround yourself with great people. And I feel really fortunate that I learned this early on. And I can't even remember in hindsight how I picked up on it. But I always used to hear people say, like, the most important thing is surrounding yourself with great people. And when I first started hearing that, it sounded so cliche. And I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds great, on paper, but come on, like business creation is about hard work. And it is about hard work as well. But man, the people side of it is just so important. And for me, it started with, my investors, to mentors of mine, to employees, to board members. And nobody succeeds alone. Nobody. I've still yet to meet someone who is like succeeded alone. I mean, even individual athletes that are in an individual sport aren't succeeding alone. They have coaches and nutritionists and all, good parents and all this other stuff. So the people side of it is just so important. Also very important in challenging times, because those people will stick with you. And when you've got a bunch of talented people who are passionate about their work, they can do things that seem impossible, practically speaking. And then the third thing I would say is just resilience. I mean, you just have to be, absolutely relentless. The Dotloop story, a lot of stories, I think, particularly companies that have exit events or public offerings, you look at that exit event as like an overnight success, but almost none of them are overnight successes. Dotloop went through, all the things that most startups go through, running out of money, laying off, having to lay off team members because you can't make payroll, struggling to find product market fit, getting sued by bigger companies. It's just like an endless, when you're creating a company from scratch, especially if it's like a category that's being created, right? Where you're not just like optimizing within an existing category, that's tough. And all the odds are against you, and you're just dealing with problems and setbacks all day long. And it requires a lot of resilience to be able to get through that.
I 1,000% agree. It's a very interesting experience, and I treasure it in all the learnings that we've had over the last, 8 years at Side. And like you said, the people you surround yourself with are the most important. Speaking of people, what type of mentors did you seek out, or did you try and find mentors in the business community or in the VC world to kind of understand that world? Because that's not something typically that, we learn in law school, right? Is how to actually build a business. But it sounds like you surrounded yourself with a lot of smarter individuals.
Yeah, I did. And I didn't really understand or recognize that they were mentors at the time. They were just people who were willing to share information and experiences with me that I could learn from. And I think actually there's one moment that comes to mind that really gave me a lot of clarity on this whole mentor point. I was sitting down with this guy who was a really successful entrepreneur in the Cincinnati area where I was from. And he invested like, an hour and a half of time with me. And I was just like a random nobody. I was like a college kid, hadn't ever created anything. And this guy was spending all this time with me. And at the end of the meeting, I'm thinking to myself, like, what is the catch here? Like, what is this guy wanting to get out of this? Because I feel like I'm the only one receiving and not giving. So I asked him, I'm like, hey, his name was Normand. And I said, hey, Norm, like, what's the catch here, man? I super appreciate all this knowledge you're giving me, but why? Why are you spending your time with me and sharing this? And he said, well, Austin, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but he basically said something along the lines of, well, Austin, as you get further along in life and you have some success along the way, one of the most rewarding parts of being successful is being able to share those experiences back with other people and help other people succeed. So that's what I'm getting out of this. The thought of helping you succeed is rewarding to me. And all you got to do is ask for help. And so many people just don't ask for help, or they're afraid to ask for help. They're afraid to hear no, whatever the case might be. But I picked up on that and I started asking for help. And frankly, I may have even wore out my welcome on this, because like even still to this day, like I'm a guy that's always going around asking for help, and asking for people to share experiences. And now I'm able to return the favor, to other entrepreneurs who are earlier in their career. But that's kind of how it started. I would just ask people for help, and most people would offer the help and share their experiences. And when they did, I made sure to like follow up with them. And that's another thing that I learned is if somebody would share like advice with me or an experience with me, I would then take that experience and go implement it. And sometimes it would work, sometimes it wouldn't, but at a minimum I would learn from the experience. And I would report back to that mentor and say, hey, remember that thing that you told me? I went and I tried it. Here's what I learned. And that feedback loop I found really started to build a lot of credibility with a mentor in me, meaning they knew that they could share things with me and I would act on them. So they then started investing more and more and more in this. And eventually, like, really meaningful things came out of these relationships. Like my first ever angel investor was a guy named Jerry Royce, who's still a great friend of mine, who I do, a lot of personal business with now. But he was my original boss. I was an intern at this company called Duke Realty. We had created Dotloop on nights and weekends. And I went into his office one day to ask for a 30-day unpaid leave of absence so that I could go figure out how to raise money and figure out how to hire a CEO for Dotloop. Because I was so loyal to Jerry and Duke, the thought of leaving Jerry and Duke was like inconceivable. So I walk around Jerry's desk, I present the prototype. He then, after the presentation, I went to the other side of his desk and he said, Austin, first off, I appreciate all your loyalty to Duke, but you have to go pursue this idea. I can see your passion. I can hear it in your voice. I can see it in your eyes. This may be a once in a lifetime opportunity. We'll always be here if you want to come back and, work for us, but you have to follow your passion here. And the second thing he said is, he said, would you allow me to be your first investor? He had never invested in a tech company. I had no clue how to raise money. And I'm like, sure. And the first thing I thought after that is, there must be other guys like Jerry. So I said, or gals like Jerry. And I said, do you have any friends that might also be interested in this? And he's like, well, let me think about it. And a few days later, he had this, meeting set up with 4 or 5 of other real estate execs in Cincinnati. And that's how our first round of capital came together. And it was all just, a little bit serendipitous in the sense that, like, I just had a relationship with these people, and I asked questions and I respected them and I was grateful. And it led to other opportunities that I didn't anticipate or plan.
I think that is such a wonderful and heartwarming story, because you can feel the passion just exuding in your retelling of the story. And it resonates a lot with me personally too, as to my mission and trying to get it more able for business, women and minorities to own their own business in real estate, which leads me into kind of doing a pivot. And the current project that you're working on, Pacaso, is one that I personally find so extremely fascinating, especially given our market of the bar to entry to buying real estate is a lot higher than it was when we were in law school, right? And so tell me about the origin story of Pacaso, or if you want, start with what Pacaso is and then the origin story, so we can dive into that, because it is fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. So Pacaso is a global co-ownership marketplace focused on vacation homes. And through this marketplace, consumers are able to buy a portion of a vacation home, and Pacaso manages the entire experience. We handle the design, the furnishing, the bill pay, the maintenance. We've created an innovative scheduling app that enables people to share access to the calendar. And the problem that we're solving is a problem of kind of underutilization and inefficiency. The typical vacation home is only used 5 weeks per year, which means that the typical vacation home sits empty for 10 to 11 months per year. And I mentioned that efficiency has always been something that I've really been focused on and passionate about, which led to the creation of Dotloop. It also is tightly integrated into the kind of the value proposition and the solution that we've created at Pacaso. In terms of the origin story, I mentioned that I grew up living paycheck to paycheck, which meant that we never had a vacation home. Like for me, like we didn't even have carpet for most of our lives. We didn't even have carpet on our floors in our primary home. We lived on unfinished plywood. So for me, home ownership was a dream, not a foregone conclusion. The entrepreneurial journey that I had did lead my wife and I to a place where we were able to afford a vacation home about 10 years ago in Lake Tahoe. And it was just such a life-changing experience for us. And like, I wanted to basically make it possible for more people is kind of the net of it. The life-changing part of it is that when you buy a vacation home, you're not just buying a piece of real estate. You are buying a second group of friends, a second community, a second life in many ways. And the way that vacation home makes you feel, the experiences and the memories that vacation home enables are priceless. I mean, I literally can't put a value on the time and the experience and the memories that we've made in this home in Lake Tahoe. And sometimes people think I'm crazy when I say this, but I would argue that, and by the way, I recognize that owning a vacation home is an absolute luxury. So this is this comes second after somebody has been able to put a primary roof over their heads. So by no means am I suggesting that this is more important than kind of the primary need. But for people who have satisfied the primary need of having a roof over their heads, and they have some discretionary income, they have some savings, having a happy place that you can call home, that you own, is in many ways more valuable than your primary home. Because at my primary home, it's so much about utility. I'm doing laundry, I'm doing dishes, I'm cooking breakfast, I'm taking the kid to school. It feels a lot different than how I feel when I'm at my vacation home. My vacation home is about recharging my batteries. It's about spending time with family and friends. It's about mountain biking, a hobby that I love that I don't have as much time for in my primary home. And all that translates into a better life, because at the end of the day, the only thing that we get to take home with us, after our time here on earth, is our memories. And like, you can have all the money in the world, but you can't do anything with it in your grave. So like, all the resources that we accumulate and the income that we earn are really about reinvesting in memories and experiences that enable us to get the most out of life. And that's what this vacation home did for me. And that's what it now does for all of our customers. But the old model was just so broken. And in a world where homes are getting less affordable, in a world where people are more comfortable with sharing economy kind of solutions, in a world where people are more concerned about sustainability, and utilization, it only makes sense for people to pool their resources and share access to a vacation home that they would otherwise only be using 5 or 6 weeks a year.
Yeah. Oh, the realization that life is short and it's fleeting and you only get to have, your memories with you is spot on in my book. It's a very real situation. And I think a lot of people can attest to that in their own personal lives. So so you came up with this idea of co-ownership for vacation homes. How did you bake through the nitty-gritty details? Because timeshares have been around for a long time, things like that, but this is clearly different. And how did you sit down and like itemize and go through all those things that you had to hammer out?
Yeah, this is such an interesting question, because the answer to that question for Pacaso was so much different than the answer to that question for Dotloop. With Dotloop, I literally just like jumped right into it and started problem solving, because that's all I knew. But with Pacaso, I had the benefit of sort of thinking about this problem and thinking about possible solutions for many, many years. Like, I've been thinking about this idea since 2013, when we bought that vacation home in Lake Tahoe, which has been 11 years now, right? So it had been 6 or 7 years before we actually started Pacaso that I had been thinking about this idea. And when I left Zillow, I had this moment in time where I had an opportunity to take some time off, which I thought, this may be a once in a lifetime opportunity. I'm going to seize this moment and take some time off before starting the next company. So I committed to not starting Pacaso for a year after leaving Zillow. But during that year, just before I had gone into my year sabbatical, I read this quote that was attributed to Einstein that said, if you have 60 minutes to save the world, you should spend 55 minutes understanding the problem and only 5 minutes on the solution. And I was like, wow, like that is profound and just so insightful, especially given, all the mistakes that we made, things I didn't know, because we started solution first at Dotloop, not problem understanding first. So that's how I thought about my year off. My year off was about the 55 minutes. And we studied all the other models that had come before us. I talked to a bunch of prospective customers and really, really, really understood the problem and the possible solutions. And one thing that became apparent to me is that we didn't need to invent a new solution. There already was a solution that existed. We call it co-ownership. Basically means multiple people are sharing ownership of a property together, typically through an LLC. This model had been around for a long time, but the model was not like practical or efficient for people to do on their own. There were all these flaws associated with the DIY co-ownership model. Financing didn't exist. Resale didn't exist. All the little decisions that need to be made around who gets what dates, when do we repair things when they break. All those things create a lot of friction in the experience, so that when people try to do this on their own, they often end up stuck or they end up frenemies on the other side of it. So the Pacaso insight was, what if we took this proven model that had been around for forever and layered on a bunch of services that addressed all the pain points? Kind of like, it's not dissimilar from like Airbnb. Airbnb didn't invent the idea of couch surfing, but the combination of like their marketplace and their payments and their ratings and reviews and all the other stuff that made Airbnb possible, made it a mainstream category that previously was not mainstream. And that is the opportunity that we saw here. Let's just modernize this thing that's been happening in DIY format for years and empower a lot of people to live better lives. So that's kind of what I did in the year off. And then, you can't plan everything. We raised our first round of capital in February of 2020. Couple weeks after that, the whole world was shut down with COVID. People weren't even accepting Amazon packages in their home. And we were trying to convince people to, share access to a home, which seemed like, a dead on arrival kind of an idea at the time. But then a few months after, we persevered and innovated, and we found ways to get people into homes and COVID compliant ways. And then that headwind turned into a big tailwind when people wanted to get out of their home and work remote. And that tailwind really carried us through the first couple of years until it didn't, and then interest rates tripled and the war in Ukraine started, and, a bunch of other kind of macro events caused the real estate market to slow down quite a bit. And that really defined our 2023. So I guess like the more you understand the problem, the more prepared you can be, but you can never be fully prepared for what the market is going to bring.
Yeah, spot on. But you have a really cool, unique experience to draw from also, right? You created a company, you had the levers to pull, you had to go through the growing pains of Dotloop and, unfortunately lay people off and save here and spend there and make those executive decisions. Being faced with the COVID situation, for example, did you find that prior experience helped you be better prepared for having to make those difficult decisions during 2020?
Definitely. I would say it is, I've found it to be, I don't know that easier is the right word, but I will say that I definitely feel more prepared and more effective as a founder and CEO now than I was before. Because, the only real shortcuts that I've found is surrounding yourself with great mentors who share experiences, right? That helps to kind of see around corners. And then reading, like the combination of those two things can definitely shorten the learning curve. But there are no substitutes for some of these things that you just have to learn on your own. Like nobody ever hires, at least nobody with a, moral compass that's in the right direction, hires people with the intention of laying them off. That is like the absolute last thing that any leader wants to have to do, is lay people off. But until you've gone through it and found yourself in the situation, it's just hard to imagine. So like, but actually, this is a great example. When we first ran out of money at Dotloop, which happened a couple of times, I had to lay off half the company because we were like, I had already depleted my savings, I had maxed out my credit cards, hadn't taken a salary for a year, and then after all of that, we ran out of money and had to lay off the staff. And it was so painful. I'm like, we're never going to go through this again. I'm never, ever, ever going to allow myself to get into this situation again. And we ran Pacaso very conservatively relative to the growth that we were experiencing. I mean, the company was just growing at really crazy rates. And, there was an argument to be made that we should have hired 1,000 people, during those first couple of years because of how quick the company was growing. And we only hired 300. And, everybody had, was working three people's jobs in that period because we wanted to make sure that we weren't getting out ahead of our skis because we knew the market was probably a little bit frothy. But we couldn't have anticipated the type of correction that happened, in late 2022 that carried through of all 2023. So we still found ourselves in a position where we had to cut back on expenses, and it impacted some people's jobs, and super sad. And man, again, I never want to go through that again, but it's another one of these examples of where you just can't always predict and plan for the types of things that the market can throw at you.
Right. I want to get into, your recommendations of books that you've read and things like that in a second. But first, the lawyer in me is starting to be like, I really want to know the nuts and bolts of how Pacaso works, but I'm on the outlier of, people that want to know how things work. So on a high level or generalization level, how does it function? Say three people, or you want to buy a vacation house, anywhere. You can call it, say, Lake Tahoe. But how do I do that as as an individual person, and I don't know the two other people that I want to go into business with?
Yeah, it's actually super easy. You basically go to Pacaso.com, you find the home that you're interested in, and I'm sure you'll link to the website, but for listeners, it's pacaso.com. And you find your dream home, and you're able to buy as little as 1/8 of the home, which works out to 5 or 6 weeks a year on average, or you can buy up to half of the home, depending on how much you want to use it. You don't know the other people, and that is a feature, not a bug, because when you don't know the other people, you don't have to worry about the disagreements or the friction associated with coordination and decisions. Pacaso is the intermediary helping to create this seamless experience. And then once you own the home, you basically schedule time in your app. The app is designed in such a way that it distributes the calendar fairly and equitably amongst the group. So if you own 1/8, you will get 1/8 of the peak season, 1/8 of the non-peak, and 1/8 of the holidays. You can book up to 24 months out. Then when you show up at the house, you just pull your stuff out of the owner's closet. It's your home, you own it, so you can leave your stuff there. And you just get to enjoy the home with no headaches or no hassle. And when you're done, you leave, put your stuff in the owner's closet. Pacaso cleans the home for the next owner. You also, very shortly, depending on when you're listening to this, it may already be live, but we're in the process of launching a really exciting feature called Global Swap, which will enable a Pacaso owner to share time and swap time with other Pacaso owners anywhere in the globe. So we operate in about 40 markets, mostly in the US, but also Paris, London, and Cabo. So if you own a Pacaso house in Napa, for example, and you want to enjoy a Pacaso house in Paris, you will very soon have the ability to do that. And then when you go to resell, we've created a resale marketplace where your home just gets listed like a normal whole home, except for you're just listing your share. And we'll provide you with guidance on the price, but ultimately seller gets to pick the price and buyers come to the table, oftentimes working with real estate agents who are representing them on the buy. And it works just like a normal real estate transaction, but way faster, way easier. Actually, on the ease point, one of the things that we're seeing is an interesting trend that's just growing in popularity is international demand. We're about 90% of our buyers who are buying internationally are Americans. And it's very hard. Without Pacaso, it's very hard to buy abroad. Like if you live in the US and you want to buy a place in Paris, I mean, that is a big undertaking. You're talking 6 months of time, ramping up with experts on tax and real estate and all this stuff, entity creation. With Pacaso, you can be an owner in Paris same day. We've done all that work for you. We've created a structure that makes it super fast, super easy. And we also offer competitive financing, which previously was never available on co-ownership. There was never a way to get a loan that was shared on a home that was shared with people without joint and several liability. And that's a problem because with joint and several liability, if one person defaults, the other people are on the hook, which nobody wants that. So with the Pacaso model, if somebody were to default, Pacaso steps in and manages that default, so the other owners don't have to worry about it.
I love it. I know what I'm doing all afternoon is I'm home shopping.
I love it. You know who to call when you find your dream home.
I do. I love it. So yes, would love to touch on any books that you found inspiring or that you lean back on in your kind of CEO business ownership journey. Anything you'd recommend?
Yeah, 2 books come to mind. One book that's probably my favorite. I mean, it's hard to pick a favorite book, but I would say in this moment in time, in this environment, the book that's coming to mind is probably the Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. And the book just really does a great job of framing up, how hard it is to be an entrepreneur and to create something from 0 to 1. And I mentioned that book because we're still in a pretty tough environment, at least for real estate and for other industries. So, but even in a great environment, entrepreneurship is super hard. So that book really puts it into perspective, and I think helped me to kind of navigate those hard times. But the other book that's definitely my favorite book, right now, but it's more of like a kind of a perspective on life book, is called Die with Zero. Incredible book that I highly recommend everyone reads. And when you hear the title of it, it could easily be misinterpreted as like a book for wealthy people to go spend all their money recklessly. But that is not what the book is about at all. I mean, if you're in that category and that's how you want to spend your life, sure, the book speaks to that. But it's really more about kind of how to live the best possible life. We all, as humans, there's something that we're optimizing for or should be optimizing for. And for most people, not everyone, but most people, it's about doing amazing things with people that you love, friends and family. It's like experiences and memories. And all the work that we do, to build wealth or accumulate resources is really about creating resources to reinvest in those things, the things that we actually care about. But the challenge is we all get caught up on this like hamster wheel of life, where we're just like in the zone working, focused on, making the next dollar or getting the next promotion in our job. And we forget to actually live. Like I don't hear this as much like in California where I live now, but where I grew up in Ohio, there was this may be a little bit of a stereotype and maybe influenced by the people who were in my life at the time, but most people thought about their career as something that they did until they retired, in their mid 60s. And then in their mid 60s, then they would go have fun. Then they would go travel. Then they would go play golf and do all this other stuff. And I just think that's such a flawed, approach to life. And this Die with Zero book does a much better job of articulating why that thought process is flawed. We should be living today. We should all be living today. And like at Pacaso, this is also probably the most important business book for me right now, because we sell to people who are pretty high net worth. They're buying a luxury home. It's a discretionary thing. They don't absolutely have to have it, but they've earned the right to be able to invest in their life in this way. But the biggest challenge that we have is getting the prospect to refocus on what they're actually optimizing for. Like if they're having conversations with us about, interest rates are too high, or, now's not the right time, or I'm too busy at work, like, we're having the wrong conversation. The conversation is about how can we help you, Mr. and Mrs. Customer, achieve your life goals, which again, for most people, is creating more memories and experiences with people that they love. So I highly encourage everybody to read that book, follow the author. His name's Bill Perkins. It's been life-changing for me.
I could not agree more. Life is short. You and I both subscribe to that. Well, I appreciate your time, and I want to give a plug on where people can find you on the social channels, Instagram, LinkedIn, wherever.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find us at Pacaso Homes, and then on all the channels. My handle, I'm not super active on social, but my handle is G Austin Allison. So you can find me as well on those channels. And then also check out our website, Pacaso.com. We actually just launched a really, really cool growth round of financing that's open to the public. Core to our mission at Pacaso is about democratizing access to housing. Over the years, we've had a lot of customers and prospective customers ask us if they could invest in Pacaso, the company. So, after hearing this request over and over again, we decided to launch a growth round of capital that enables people to do just that. So I'd encourage everybody to check that out as well. There's an invest link at the top of our website where you can learn more about that.
I love it. Thank you for doing everything to be an industry leader and shaker. And when things are not working, you step in and find the niche. So kudos to you, to the success. And like I said, I'll be spending my afternoon looking at houses on Pacaso.
Thank you so much. And huge congrats on all of your success at Side as well. It's been really fun to follow, and it's been an honor to be on the pod.
Thanks so much. And we'll see you on another episode of Own It.
Next time on Own It, we're talking with the powerhouse duo behind the No Hate campaign, Adam Buska and Jeff Parsley. From fighting for marriage equality to advocating for inclusion worldwide, they've turned a single social media photo into a global movement. Hear their inspiring journey, their thoughts on allyship, and why their work is more relevant today than ever.